The purpose of today's hearing is to examine the dominance of Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google. Amazon runs the largest online marketplace in America, capturing 70% of all online marketplace sales. It operates across a vast array of businesses, from cloud computing and movie production to transportation logistics and small business lending. Amazon's market valuation recently hit $1.5 trillion, more than that of Walmart, Target, Salesforce, IBM, eBay, and Etsy combined. Apple is a dominant provider of smartphones, with more than 100 million iPhone users in the United States alone. In addition to hardware, Apple sells services and apps, including financial services, media, and games. Facebook is the world's largest provider of social networking services, with a business model that sells digital ads. Despite a litany of privacy scandals and record-breaking fines, Facebook continues to enjoy booming profits, $18 billion last year alone. Lastly, Google is the world's largest online search engine, capturing more than 90% of searches online. It controls key technologies and digital ad markets and enjoys more than 1 billion users across 6 products, including browsers, smartphones, and digital maps. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, these corporations already stood out as titans in our economy. In the wake of COVID-19, however, they're likely to emerge stronger and more powerful than ever before. As American families shift more of their work, shopping, and communication online, these giants stand to profit. Locally owned businesses, meanwhile, mom-and-pop stores on Main Street, face an economic crisis unlike any in recent history. As hard it is to believe, it's possible that our economy will emerge from this crisis even more concentrated and consolidated than before. These companies serve as critical arteries of commerce and communications. Because these companies are so central to our modern life, their business practices and decisions have an outsized effect on our economy and our democracy. Any single action by one of these companies can affect hundreds of millions of us in profound and lasting ways. Although these 4 corporations differ in important and meaningful ways, we've observed common patterns and competition problems over the course of this investigation. First, each platform is a bottleneck for a key channel of distribution. Whether they control access to information or to a marketplace, these platforms have the incentive and ability to exploit this power. They can charge exorbitant fees, impose oppressive contracts, and extract valuable data from the people and businesses that rely on them. Second, each platform uses its control over digital infrastructure to surveil other companies, their growth, business activity, and whether they might pose a competitive threat. Each platform has used this data to protect its power by either buying, copying, or cutting off access for any actual or potential rival. Third, these platforms abuse their control over current technologies to extend their power, whether it's through self-preferencing, predatory pricing, or requiring users to buy additional products. The dominant platforms have wielded their power in destructive, harmful ways in order to expand. At today's hearing, we'll examine how each of these companies has used this playbook to achieve and maintain dominance and how their power shapes and affects our daily lives. So why does this matter? Many of the practices used by these companies have harmful economic effects. They discourage entrepreneurship, destroy jobs, hike costs, and degrade quality. Simply put, they have too much power. This power staves off new forms of competition, creativity, and innovation. And while these dominant firms may still produce some new innovative products, their dominance is killing the small businesses, manufacturing, and overall dynamism that are the engines of the American economy. Open markets are predicated on the idea that if a company harms people, consumers, workers, and business partners will choose another option. We're here today because that choice is no longer possible. So my first question, Mr. Pichai, is why does Google steal content from honest businesses?
Mr. Chairman, with respect, I disagree with that characterization. Just last week, I met with many small businesses. In fact, today we support 1.4 million small businesses, supporting over $385 billion in economic activity. We see many businesses thrive, particularly even during the pandemic. Businesses, an example, Kettle Kings in Texas, which sells kettlebells. They've really expanded.
I have a limited amount of time, so I don't want to interrupt you, but my question is very specific. We heard throughout this investigation that Google has stolen content to build your own business. These are consistent reports, and so Your testimony that doesn't happen is really inconsistent with what we've learned during the course of the investigation, but I'll move on to a new question. Mr. Pichai, most Americans believe that when they enter a search query that what Google shows are the most relevant results. But increasingly, Google just shows whatever is most profitable for Google, be it Google Ads or Google's own sites. And so my question, Mr. Pichai, isn't there a fundamental conflict of interest between serving users who want to access the best and most relevant information and Google's business model, which incentivizes Google to sell ads and keep users on Google's own sites?
We've always focused on providing users the most relevant information, and we rely on the trust for users to come back to Google every day. In fact, a vast majority of queries in Google, we don't show ads at all, and we show ads only for a small subset of queries where the intent from users is highly commercial. For example, they may be looking for something like TV sets or so on.
But Mr. Pichai, what is the value of the part that you do use the Google ads for? I mean, it's a substantial part of your business. What's the actual value? 200 billion, 300 billion?
In terms of revenue, it's around $100+ billion. Okay. But
that's a lot of money, Mr. Pichai. Let me move on. Really, Mr. Pichai, it's Google's business model that is the problem. Our documents show that Google evolved from a turnstile to the rest of the web to a walled garden that increasingly keeps users within its sites. Emails show that over a decade ago, Google started to fear competition from certain websites, web pages that could divert search traffic and revenue from Google. These documents show that Google staff discussed the proliferating threat, is how it was described, that these web pages pose to Google. Any traffic lost to other sites was a loss in revenue. One of Google's memos observed that certain websites were getting, and I quote, too much traffic. So Google decided to put an end to that. Mr. Pichai, you've been at Google since 2004. Were you involved in these discussions about the threat from vertical search?
Congressman, without knowing the specifics, it's, I'm not fully clear of the context, but definitely when we look at vertical searches, it validates the competition we see. For example, when users come looking to shop online, independent studies show that over 55% of product searches originate with Amazon and over 70% originate with the major e-commerce companies. In the few categories which are commercial in nature, we see vigorous competition, be it travel, be it real estate, and we are working hard, focused
let me ask
on
very specifically, Mr. Pichai.
There.
The evidence that we collected shows that Google pursued a multi-pronged attack. First, Google began to steal other web pages' content. For example, in 2010, Google stole restaurant reviews from Yelp to bootstrap its own rival local search business. Mr. Pichai, do you know how Google responded when Yelp asked you to stop stealing their reviews? Well, I'll tell you, our investigation shows that Google's response was to threaten to delist Yelp entirely. In other words, the choice Google gave Yelp was, let us steal your content or effectively disappear from the web. Mr. Pichai, isn't that anti-competitive?
Congressman, when I run the company, I'm really focused on giving users what they want. We conduct ourselves to the highest standard. Happy to engage, understand the specifics, and answer your questions further.
Thank you. And just one final series of questions, Mr. Pichai. Did Google ever use its surveillance over web traffic to identify competitive threats?
Congressman, just like other businesses, we try to understand trends from data which we can see, and we use it to improve our products for our users. But we are really focused on improving our products, and that's how search works.
I appreciate that, Mr. Pichai. Google's own documents and numerous interviews with companies affected by this conduct show that Google did just that, which is very disturbing and very anti-competitive. In addition to stealing content, Google also began to privilege its own sites. An investigative report published just yesterday found that 63% of web searches that start on Google also end somewhere on Google's own websites. And to me, that's evidence that Google is increasingly a walled garden, which keeps users on Google sites, even if Google doesn't have the most relevant information and it's economically catastrophic for other companies online. And so my time is running out, but Mr. Pichai, I'll just end by saying the evidence seems very clear to me. As Google became the gateway to the internet, it began to abuse its power. It used its surveillance over web traffic to identify competitive threats and crush them. It has dampened innovation and new business growth, and it's dramatically increased the price of accessing users on the internet, virtually ensuring that any business that wants to be found on the web must pay Google a tax.
Mr. Cook, with over 100 million iPhone users in the United States alone, and with Apple's ownership of the App Store, giving Apple the ability to control which apps are allowed to be marketed to Apple users, you wield immense power over small businesses to grow and prosper. Apple is the sole decision maker as to whether an app is made available to app users through Apple's App Store. Isn't that correct?
Sir, the App Store, thank you for the questions. The App Store is a feature of the iPhone, much like the camera is and the chip is.
Yeah.
And so
my point is, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but I want to get to the point. Point is that Apple is the sole decision maker as to whether an app is made available to app users through the Apple Store. Isn't that correct?
If it's a native app, yes, sir. If it's a web app, no.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And throughout our investigation, we've heard concerns that rules governing the App Store review process are not available to the app developers. The rules are made up as you go. They are arbitrarily interpreted and enforced and are subject to change whenever Apple sees fit to change. And developers have no choice but to go along with the changes, or they must leave the App Store. That's an enormous amount of power. Also, the rules get changed to benefit Apple at the expense of app developers, and the App Store is said to also discriminate between app developers with similar apps on the Apple platform, and also as to small app developers versus large app developers. So, Mr. Cook, does Apple not treat all app developers equally?
Sir, we treat every developer the same. We have open and transparent rules. It's a rigorous process. Because we care so deeply about privacy and security and quality, we do look at every app before it goes on. But those rules apply evenly to everyone. And as you can tell by going from...
Some developers are favored over others, though. Isn't that correct?
That is not correct. And as you can tell from going from just 500...
I'll give you an example. Baidu has two App Store employees assigned to help it navigate the App Store bureaucracy. Is that true?
I don't know about that, sir.
Well, you don't have other app developers who have that same access to Apple personnel, do you?
We do a lot of things with developers, including looking at their beta test apps, regardless of whether they're small or large.
Okay, well, let me ask you this question. Apple has negotiated exceptions to its typical 30% commission for some apps like Amazon Prime. Is a reduced commission such as the one that Amazon Prime gets available to other app developers?
It's available to anyone meeting the conditions, yes.
Okay, well, let me ask you this. Apple requires all app developers to use Apple's payment processing system if those developers want to sell their goods or services to Apple users through Apple's App Store. Isn't that correct?
That is correct, because it's
by processing payments for apps that you allow into the App Store, you collect their customer data and you use that data to inform Apple as to whether or not it would be profitable for Apple to launch a competing app. Isn't that correct?
Sir, 84% of the apps are charged nothing. The remaining 16% either pay 15 or 30, depending upon the specifics. If it's in the second year of a subscription, as an example, it only pays 15%. If you look back at history...
What's to stop Apple from increasing its commission to 50%?
Sir, we have never increased commissions in the store since the first day it operated in 2008.
There's nothing to stop you from doing so, is it?
No, sir, I disagree strongly with that. There is a competition for developers just like there's a competition for customers. And so the competition for developers, they can write their apps for Android or Windows or Xbox or PlayStation. So we have fierce competition at the developer side and the customer side, which is essentially, it's so competitive, I would describe it as a street fight for market share in the smartphone business.
Mr. Zuckerberg, as you know, the proliferation of fake Facebook accounts was a key tool in the strategy of Russian interference in the American election in 2016. American law enforcement, the Senate, the House, have all found that Vladimir Putin engaged in a sweeping and systematic campaign to undermine American democracy in 2016 and to work for a victory for Donald Trump. In his remarkable book, Mind Blank, and I'm being polite here, Cambridge Analytica and the Plot to Break America, whistleblower Christopher Wiley, who worked for several years at Cambridge Analytica, recounts how the Russian assault on America in Cambridge Analytica's research depended on Facebook. Quote, when Cambridge Analytica launched in the summer of 2014, Steve Bannon's goal was to change politics by changing culture. Facebook data, algorithms, and narratives were his key weapons. The Cambridge Analytica team used these tools to identify people who exhibited the three traits in what they called the dark triad: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. They then proceeded to bombard and activate these people, a small percentage of the American public, but still millions of people, with increasingly dark and manipulative messages from fake Facebook pages, both to get them to vote for Trump, but more importantly, to activate them as racists and white nationalists. And they go on to describe he goes on to describe the remarkable success of this campaign, both electorally, but also politically in the country in terms of sowing the terrible racial and ethnic divisions that you see in America today. So they waged a mass campaign of psychological warfare to polarize America around race and religion and to activate racists and anti-Semites. And it worked splendidly for them, but it didn't work so well for America. So Mr. Zuckerberg, which parts of this narrative have you addressed, or are you planning to address, or do you just see that essentially as the cost of being a forum and a marketplace for ideas? Is there nothing that can be done about the use of Facebook to engender social division in America?
Congressman, thank you. Since 2016, there have been a lot of steps that we've taken to protect the integrity of elections. We've hired, I think it's more than 30,000 people to work on safety and security. We've built up AI systems to be able to find harmful content, including being able to find more than 50 different networks of coordinated and authentic behavior, basically nation states trying to interfere in elections.
Can I pause you? Let me just pause you there for a second, because I'm interested in that. The Stop Hate for Profit campaign is a coalition that includes the Color of Change, the Anti-Defamation League, and other civil rights groups, and they're targeting Facebook right now for a boycott because of the rapid spread of hate messages online, the presence of Boogaloo and other right-wing extremist groups trying to infiltrate and disrupt Black Lives Matter protests, and the fact that alt-right, racist, and anti-Semitic content flourishes on Facebook. So they're asking you to remove these pages and essentially to join the movement for civil rights by not allowing that kind of content. Their boycotters include a lot of big companies, including Patagonia, Levi's, McDonald's, VW, Heineken, and so on. But you seem not to be that moved by their campaign, and I just wonder what you think about what they're asking you to do.
Congressman, thanks. We're very focused on fighting against election interference, and we're also very focused on fighting against hate speech. And our commitments to those issues and fighting them go back years before this recent movement. Since 2016, the defenses that the company has built up to help secure elections, not just in the US, but around the world, I think are some of the most advanced that any company or government has in the world now. We routinely now collaborate with law enforcement and intelligence agencies and are able to sometimes identify threats coming from other countries before governments are even able to. In terms of fighting hate, we've built really sophisticated systems, our goal is to identify it before anyone even sees it on the platform. And we've built AI systems and, as I mentioned, have tens of thousands of people working on safety and security with the goal of getting this stuff down so that way before people even see it. And right now, we're able to proactively identify 89% of the hate speech that we take down before I think it's even seen by other people.
Mr. Bezos, according to your testimony, the marketplace is competitive, but Amazon controls as much as 75% of all online marketplace sales. An eMarketer, a source you cited to us in submissions to this committee, reports that Amazon has nearly 7 times the market share of its closest competitor. Isn't it true that small businesses have no real option but to rely on Amazon to connect with customers and make online sales?
No, sir. With great respect, I do have a different opinion on that. I believe there are a lot of options for small sellers. I believe Amazon is a great one, and we've worked very hard. I think we are the best one.
Well,
we
Mr.
have
Bezos,
a lot of different programs that help sellers, but we are not the only option.
There are 2.2 million active sellers as of yesterday. About 37% of those sellers rely on Amazon as their sole source of income. That is over 800,000 people relying on Amazon to feed their families, put their kids through school, and keep a roof over their heads. Mr. Bezos, you have referred to third-party sellers as both your partners and customers. But isn't it true that Amazon refers to third-party sellers as internal competitors?
I think I wouldn't surprise me. In some ways, we are competing, and they're also competing with each other.
Well, that's right. Your own documents,
Mr.
Bezos, Amazon's own documents that you produce refer to the very same sellers that you've described as Amazon partners as internal competitors. In fact, we've heard from third-party sellers again and again during the course of the investigation that Amazon is the only game in town. One small business owner we interviewed described it this way, and I quote, "We're stuck. We don't have a choice but to sell through Amazon." Another said, and I quote, "They've never been a great partner, but you have to work with them." During this investigation, we have heard so many heartbreaking stories of small businesses who sunk significant time and resources into building a business and selling on Amazon, only to have Amazon poach their best-selling items and drive them out of business. So I want to talk to you about one company that really stood out from the rest. I want you to pay close attention to how they described your partnership, Mr. Bezos. We heard from a small apparel company that makes and sells what they call useful apparel for people who work on their feet and with their hands, like construction workers and firefighters. This particular business discovered and started selling a unique item that had never been a top seller for the brand. They were making about $60,000 a year on just this one item. One day, they woke up and found that Amazon had started listing the exact same product, causing their sales to go to zero overnight. Amazon had undercut their price, setting it below what the manufacturer would generally allow it to be sold, so that even if they wanted to, they couldn't match the price. Here's how the apparel company described working with Amazon, and I quote, "Amazon strings you along for a while because it feels so good to get that paycheck every week. And in the past, for lack of a better term, we called it Amazon heroin because you just kept going and you had to get your next fix, your next check. But at the end of the day, you find out that this person who was seemingly benefiting you, making you feel good, was just ultimately going to be your downfall," end quote. So, Mr. Bezos, this is one of your partners. Why on earth would they compare your company to a drug dealer?
Sir, I have great respect for you in this committee, but I completely disagree with that characterization. What we have done is create in the store a place. If you go back in time, we sold only our own inventory. It was a very controversial decision inside the company to invite third-party sellers to come into what is really our most valuable retail real estate, our product detail pages. We did that because we were convinced that it would be better for the consumer. It would be better for the customer
Bezos,
to have all of that selection. And I think we were right, and I think it's worked out well.
Reclaiming my time. Unfortunately, this is one of reclaiming my time, Mr. Bezos. This is one of many small companies that have told us during this year-long investigation that they were mistreated, abused, and tossed aside by Amazon. Now, Mr. Bezos, you say that Amazon is only focused on doing what's best for the customer. You just said it again, and that third-party sellers. But how is that possible when you compete directly with third-party sellers with your own products that undercut the competition? Isn't it an inherent conflict of interest for Amazon to produce and sell products on its platform that compete directly with third-party sellers, particularly when you, Amazon, sets the rules of the game?
Thank you. No, I don't believe it is. We have the consumer is the one ultimately making the decisions. They're making the decisions about what to buy, what price to buy it at, who to buy it from. And
That's not the question, Mr. Bezos. The question is there an inherent conflict of interest because you are a data company? You know when customers put something in their cart, when they take it out. Traditional brick and mortar stores like a grocery store where competition occurs don't have that. And so I just want to follow up finally on an answer to the question that you gave to Congressman Jayapal. You said that you can't guarantee that the policy of not sharing third-party sellers' data with Amazon's own line hasn't been violated. You couldn't be certain. Can you please explain that to me? Can you list examples of where that policy has been violated? Because it's particularly concerning to me, Mr. Bezos, that shouldn't third parties know for sure that data isn't being shared with your own line, their competitors? Why should a third-party seller list their product on Amazon if they're just going to be undercut by Amazon's own product as a result of data you take from them?
Sir, I think what I want you to understand, and I think is important to understand, is that we have a policy against using individual seller data to compete with our private label products.
You couldn't assure Ms. Jayapal that that policy isn't violated routinely.
Well, we are investigating that, and I do not want to sit here, and I do not want to go beyond what I know right now. But we are, as a result of that Wall Street Journal article, we are looking at that very carefully, and we want to get those facts. And I will surely share them with you.
Thank you, and we look forward to that. The evidence we've collected shows that Amazon is only interested in exploiting its monopoly power over the e-commerce marketplace to further expand and protect this power. This investigation makes clear that Amazon's dual role as a platform operator and competing seller on that platform is fundamentally anti-competitive, and Congress must take action.